Welcome to Amazing Stories. Pope Francis has died, but while some heard the news with tears, other faces darkened in terror because his death fulfills a prophecy. An ancient prophecy hidden for centuries in the secret archives of the Vatican, the prophecy of Saint Malachy. 900 years ago, the monk Malachy was walking through the cobblestone streets of Rome when he was seized by a vision. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination. It was a glimpse of the future of the Catholic Church. In a deep trance, Malachy witnessed something impossible. A long procession of popes, one after another, moving through the centuries until reaching the end of times. Malachy wrote down the revelations in 112 Latin phrases, each with a symbol and a warning for every future pontiff, up to the last one, number 112, Peter the Roman. After him, there would be no more popes, only judgment. Today, the last name has been crossed out because Pope Francis was the 112th since Celestine II, just as Malachy had written. He was the last link in a prophetic chain that began 9 centuries ago, and today that chain has been broken. The first 111 mottos are brief, poetic, and full of symbols that described each pontiff with astonishing accuracy. Their coat of arms, their origin, their character, or their destiny. But when he got to the last one, the tone changed. It was no longer a simple phrase. Number 112 is long and terrifying, a warning that says, in the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, Peter the Roman will sit, who will shepherd his flock amid many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. Malachy. This prophecy gives us 3 clues about the last pope, 3 clear and specific facts. That he would be number 112, that he would be named Peter, that his origin would be from the city of Rome, and that his time would be full of many problems and tribulations. Francis is, without question, the 112th pope since Celestine II, just as Saint Malachy indicated. For centuries, it was believed that the last pope would be a man named Peter, born in Rome, a name that would be easy to identify. But the prophecy, like all ancient revelations, spoke in symbols, and now, looking back, everything fits together with unsettling clarity. Francis was born in a modest house in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires, but his blood is not Argentine, it's Italian. His parents were Italian and emigrated from Piedmont, in northern Italy, to leave behind an Italy marked by fascism and crisis, seeking a more dignified future for their children in Argentina. In other words, Francis was Roman by lineage, by heritage, by deep roots that connect him directly to the spiritual heart of the Church. And his real name was not Peter, as the prophecy states. His birth name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio. But when he was elected pope, they asked him what name he wanted to take, and he didn't hesitate. He looked at the cardinal and answered, Francis. He didn't choose an imperial name or a doctrinal name. He chose the saint of the poor and the marginalized. Saint Francis of Assisi, the man who gave up everything to embrace lepers, who walked barefoot and rebuilt the church with nothing but faith and kindness. However, few remember that the real name of that saint was Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone. Giovanni, son of Peter, a man marked by the most symbolic name of all, Peter. Thus, Pope Francis became the exact figure that the prophecy had described. Number 112, with the name of Peter and the blood of Rome. And in the prophecy, there is one last revelation that says, he will shepherd his flock amid many tribulations. The pontificate of Francis was not a reign of tranquility nor a time of religious glory. It was exactly what the prophecy foretold, tribulation. His own faith began at a traumatic moment, when as a young man he started to feel discomfort in his side, then a persistent fever, and after that, he began to have trouble breathing. He couldn't breathe. His parents took him to the hospital. There, the doctors looked at him with grave faces. The diagnosis was devastating, a severe lung infection with cysts that threatened his life. The infection had progressed too far, and his right lung was compromised. The doctors had no other choice. They had to remove part of his right lung. The surgery was risky and the recovery was painful. He spent entire days unable to get out of bed, and yet, in that cold room, full of tubes, white coats, and silence, something happened. It was there that, for the first time, he came face to face with the fragility of life. He realized he wasn't invincible, that his body could fail, and that death could come without warning. But he wasn't afraid. He had clarity. While others prayed for his health, he prayed for something deeper, to understand the purpose of his pain. He didn't ask for the suffering to be taken away. He asked that his suffering serve a purpose. He was never the same after that. He knew that every breath was a miracle, and that if God had let him live, it was because he still had something to do, something big. And just a few months after his recovery, still with a weak body and limited breathing, he made a decision. His place was with God. And from his very first day as Pope, he faced thousands of criticisms for who he was. For the first time in history, the Pope was not European and was a Jesuit. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe. He faced a wounded church, battered by sexual abuse scandals erupting on every continent. Victims were raising their voices, the shame was multiplying, and the outcry for justice could no longer be ignored. Francis did not hide the seriousness of the situation. He publicly asked for forgiveness, cried with the victims, and began a deep reform to put an end to impunity. But it wasn't easy, because behind every case there was institutional silence, power structures, and networks that resisted any attempt at transparency. And to that wound, another was added: internal polarization. The internal cracks became visible. Deep divisions among cardinals, tensions between progressives and conservatives, and a growing distrust toward the power structures within the Vatican. During a press conference on the flight back from his first apostolic trip to Brazil, he said, "If a gay person accepts the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge him?" The more conservative sectors of the church began to see him as a threat. They accused him of being a relativist, ambiguous, a progressive. Some cardinals even went so far as to write him public letters asking for clarification. Others accused him of heresy without any evidence. They compared him to Paul VI, to John XXII, even to Luther. But he neither responded nor defended himself. He simply continued on with a calm face, slow steps, and a conviction stronger than any criticism, because he knew he hadn't come to please, but to serve, and that every true reform, before it can bloom, must first hurt. Despite everything, Francis never strayed from his vision. For him, the future of the church does not lie in retreat, but in openness. He insists again and again on a word that makes many uncomfortable: synodality. A church that walks together, that discerns as one, that listens to the Spirit not only in the high ranks, but among the people, among women, among lay people, among those who have never been heard. He advocated for a more horizontal church, less clerical, where everyone would have a voice. A church that would include the marginalized, migrants, women, the divorced, those who have been excluded for centuries, not as a strategy, but as a true conversion. Some accused him of being too soft, others of being too rigid. Social media amplified every gesture and every word. But it wasn't just internal problems. His papacy coincided with one of the most chaotic periods in the modern world. Wars like the one in Ukraine, persecution of Christians in the East, the climate crisis, economic crisis, and a global culture increasingly hostile to faith. And in 2020, the pandemic arrived. COVID-19 closed churches, halted pilgrimages, and brought public life for millions to a standstill. Francis was left alone in an empty St. Peter's Square under the rain, in front of the exposed Blessed Sacrament. That silent and heartbreaking image was a photograph of the soul of the world. And on that night, when it seemed that even God himself had hidden, the Pope raised his voice and said, "We are not alone." It was one of the most powerful moments of his papacy, because in the greatest collective abandonment of the century, he chose to remain standing. All this while the number of faithful was decreasing and traditional faith was being questioned both from within and outside the church. On one of his boldest trips, he went to Iraq, a country devastated by war and extremism, where no pope had ever dared to go before. There, he met with Muslim and Christian leaders and called for a possible coexistence, stronger than fear. Francis reached out to Muslim, Jewish, and Orthodox leaders. He met with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the highest authority in Sunni Islam, in a gesture that broke with centuries of tension between Christians and Muslims. In that meeting, they signed a historic document on human fraternity, advocating for respect, peace, and justice above any religious boundary. He met with Jewish leaders, reaffirming their common roots and the commitment to remembering the Holocaust. He wept at the walls of Auschwitz and embraced victims of anti-Semitism. He also built bridges with the Orthodox, especially with the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Patriarch of Moscow. In Cuba, he took part in a historic meeting with Patriarch Kirill, marking the first embrace between Rome and Moscow in over 1,000 years. Pope Francis's pontificate was not a bed of roses. From the very beginning, he knew that the 21st century brought challenges as complex as they were ancient, and even so, Francis guided his flock through the darkness. He pressed on, reformed, spoke out, embraced the marginalized, and challenged the powerful. But his leadership was not comfortable. It was painful, controversial, and relentlessly demanding. From day one, his style provoked resistance. He didn't wear the ceremonial red cape. He didn't live in the palace. He didn't speak in Latin. He didn't impose. He listened. Because from the very beginning, Francis defined himself as the Pope of Mercy. His episcopal motto said it all, miserando ac eligiendo, which means he looked at him with mercy and chose him. This phrase recalled the moment when Jesus, while walking, looked at Matthew, a sinner, a tax collector, and chose him as a disciple. He didn't justify the sin, but he never condemned the sinner. Francis invited the faithful to move away from the logic of punishment and enter into the logic of embrace. He called upon missionaries of mercy, priests authorized to forgive even those sins reserved for the Pope. He urged confessors to be more like fathers and less like judges. He visited prisons, hospitals, and refugee camps. He washed the feet of immigrants, women, and people of other religions. Every gesture, every word, every silence said the same thing. Mercy is not a weakness. It is the strongest face of love. And that face, the face of Christ, was the one Francis wanted to show the world. The prophecy said, Peter the Roman will shepherd his flock amid many tribulations. That was the pontificate of Francis. And now, just as it was foretold, it has come to an end. But the prophecy ends by saying, and when these things are finished, the city of the 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. That short but devastating line marks not only the end of a list of popes, but the end of an era. The city of the 7 hills is not a metaphor. In Revelation 17, there is also mention of a city built on 7 hills. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. That city is no mystery. It is Rome, the very same Rome that Malachy mentions as destined for destruction after the last papacy. A place where judgment, purification, and possibly the collapse of an entire era will be concentrated. And according to the prophecy, that place will be destroyed, not necessarily by fire or bombs. The destruction could be more subtle, more spiritual, because the prophecy doesn't speak of destruction, it ends with a warning. The dreadful judge will judge his people. That is to say, there will be judgment not only upon the wicked, but also upon the believers. The prophecy of St. Malachy is not just a simple warning about the end times, even though many have considered it a fable. The truth is that the fulfillment of the prophecy is so precise that even skeptics have had to remain silent. The very first was Celestine II in 1143. The prophecy called him ex Castro Tiberis, from the castle of the Tiber. And in fact, Guido di Castello, his real name, was born in the Tiber region and was a cardinal at a church very close to the Sant'Iello Castle, right next to the river that runs through Rome. It's not a symbolic interpretation, it's a precise, literal geographic location. Centuries later, in modern times, the prophecy kept being accurate. John Paul I, elected in 1978, was called the Mediate Luni, from the half of the moon. He was elected on the day of a half moon and died only 33 days later, also during another half moon. His papacy was brief, mysterious, and even today there are theories about his unexpected death. A half moon, just as the prophecy warned. His successor, John Paul II, was called the Labor Solis, from the labor of the sun or the eclipse of the sun. Karol Wojtyla was born on May 18, 1920, the day of a solar eclipse, and died on April 8, 2005, right during another eclipse. His entire life was a moving light. He traveled more than any other pope in history, preaching all over the world, becoming a symbol of unity, resilience, and faith. A son that worked until the very end. And it doesn't end there. He called Benedict XVI Gloria Olivi, the glory of the olive. Some associated him with the Benedictine order, symbolically known as the branch of spiritual olive, others with his sober, peacemaking style and his theological profile. The truth is that his papal name, Benedict, seems to be a direct nod to the prophecy, as if he himself wanted to confirm it. These examples are not isolated. One after another, Malachy's mottos have lined up with historical, biographical, and spiritual realities. And so, what seemed like a poetic list has turned into a prophetic record. The last pope would be the final guardian of the church before the last judgment. But the death of Pope Francis has not only closed a chapter, it has opened a rift, an uncertainty that spreads across the world like a silent shadow. Because if Francis was, as many believe, the last prophesied pope, then what comes next is not an election, but a transition into the unknown. The question is, what now? Will there be a new legitimate pope, or will the throne of Peter be occupied by an impostor? For many, there is no doubt. The next leader will not be a shepherd, but a wolf in sheep's clothing. Some scholars of prophecy and the apocalypse point to the inevitable, that Francis's successor will be the false prophet, the figure mentioned in Revelation 13, who rises up with the appearance of piety, but speaks like a dragon, not to save, but to deceive. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. Questions are multiplying, and among them, 2 phrases stand out as warnings that can no longer be ignored. If Francis was the last pope, who will be next? Will the new leader be the one who prepares the way for the Antichrist? The prophecy of Saint Malachy is not alone. The scriptures have been warning for centuries about what now seems to be unfolding before our eyes. The Apostle Paul also warned about it in his letter to the Thessalonians. Before the end comes, there will be apostasy and the man of sin will be revealed. Jesus, in Matthew 24, was even more direct. He said that before the end there would be wars, famines, plagues, and earthquakes. He called it the beginning of sorrows. And all you have to do is look around us. Global pandemics, natural disasters, nations on the brink of war, moral and spiritual violence spreading like an invisible virus. It's not a coincidence, it's a sequence. For years, these verses seemed like distant warnings. Today, after Francisco's death, they feel close.